Welcome to the Plant a Trillion Trees podcast. I'm Eva Monheim.
And I'm Hal Rosner. We are both certified arborists through the International Society of Arboriculture. The purpose of our podcast is to encourage tree planting and proper tree care for our urban forests, which include neighborhoods, parks, and other open spaces.
We will also cover a myriad of tree topics, including the important role trees play in relationship to the climate crisis. Thank you for joining us.
Verdant Earth Educators provides dynamic in-person training and online learning opportunities for environmental and horticultural businesses. Owned by ISA certified arborists and former university faculty, the Verdant Earth Educator team provides consultations on tree care and recommends climate-resilient opportunities for your valued green spaces. Verdant Earth Educators is all about seeding knowledge for success. Find Verdant Earth Educators at verdanteartheducators.com.
Monheim Microphones designs and handcrafts top-tier studio microphones and preamps right here in the United States in Hollywood, California. Their incredible line of innovative microphones and designs are used around the world by everyone from podcasters to top-charting record producers and singers. Monheim Microphones, unparalleled excellence. MonheimMicrophones.com. The Urban Wood Network gives people strength in numbers and a collective voice to showcase the growing environmental impact of an industry like urban wood utilization. This is really critical in a world where resource recovery and carbon storage benefits can go a long way to meet the needs of climate sustainability goals of cities, businesses, and consumers. Contact us at urbanwoodnetwork.org. This podcast is being recorded on January 24th, 2025. Trinity Pierce is the Chicago Region Trees Initiative Senior Stewardship Manager at the Morton Arboretum. She collaborates with community organizations and members to increase awareness and foster action through plantings and ongoing care in order to grow a more diverse, more abundant, and more equitably distributed urban forest. An ISA certified arborist, she holds a Master of Landscape Architecture from the University of Michigan with a background in history, ecological restoration, and urban green space reconciliation. Welcome to the Plant a Trillion Trees podcast, Trinity. We're delighted that you could be with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
We would love to find out how you got started with trees. Did you pop out from infancy as a tree lover? What was the education behind it? And can you give us the background there?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Oak Park, Illinois. It's a suburb just west of the city of Chicago, and didn't realize how fortunate I was growing up on tree-lined streets, a lot of green space, and the peri-urban nature of Oak Park that we could hop on the elevated train, head right into the city of Chicago, world-class museums, green spaces, so much inspiration, but spending most of my time in a dense green space, tree-filled community. But what really drew me to nature and trees was just about every summer we'd head to northern Wisconsin to the family farm. And there was extensive woodland. There was a terrifyingly mysterious, enthralling bog. There was incredible roadside wildflowers. So I could just disappear into these different ecosystems, and that affinity for nature was organic and time would just fly by. And I really look forward to those trips. That being said, transitioning that into any type of career or seeing myself as an arborist, didn't even know the word at the time, much less clear. But at least that has stayed with me.
It sounds magical.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds magical, and not every child has that opportunity. And I know I had similar with farm opportunities, but you just never know where those special moments are going to lead you in your life, that you're really blessed to have that.
I'm aware also that you have a background in history and landscape architecture, so you're bringing a couple different important practices and disciplines to your work as an urban forester. You found your way to the Morton Arboretum in Lisle, Illinois, and the Morton Arboretum is, I guess, the grounding institution, if I have that right, for the Chicago Region Trees Initiative. Can you talk a little bit about how the Morton took that on and the structure of it and its mission?
Certainly. So the Chicago Region Trees Initiative is the Morton Arboretum's urban and community forestry arm. In the region, we're focused on more ground roots community engagement in the 7-county region, and then even more outreach support at the state level for municipalities, communities. So as we were talking earlier about just the resources of the Arboretum, imagine, if you will, we're focused on planting trees, inspiring people to value trees with CRTI, but I could walk down the hall at the Arboretum to the root lab or the soil ecology lab just to get some inspiration, to ask what's the latest research to help us care for the urban forest. So we couldn't be better situated, based out of the Arboretum, completely outreach, outward focused. And I'd say critically, the founding of CRTI was 2 main components: coalition-based and data. And I think realizing that no one organization can do this work, especially in this metropolis, just a dense urban area, but also our critical rural components as well, farther we get out, and then even the statewide focus. So that coalition has made such a difference, focus on partnerships, but also data, that we know we need to know our baseline, and we're always collecting and understanding what's the data telling us, focused on science-based solutions.
That is really fascinating. And the idea of having those 2 units working together, if it was unbalanced, it wouldn't work. But having those connections with community is critical. And I'm sure that there's a lot of dialogue between the Arboretum and the communities themselves.
Absolutely. So for us, it has to be a community-based approach. And once again, everything is investing in relationship building based on trust, partnerships. Again, no one organization can do this work alone. And there's so many resources and rich heritage and unique cultural aspects of these communities. If we're working together, it's a stronger effort. We have some resources, we have some expertise, but we don't have all the answers for ensuring community health. And I'd say, again and again, while yes, we're in urban and community forestry, we're focused on science, conservation, education. Ultimately, it's about community health. It's about building community capacity to care for existing trees, to manage ever-increasing severe storms, severe weather, to support vulnerable populations. So when we can tie that to community health and not seeing trees just in a vacuum, kind of other, realizing the health of trees, the health of communities, the health of people is intrinsically linked, that's really exciting. And we're seeing progress.
When you presented last summer for the USDA on tree shortage and contract growing, Trinity, you talked a couple times about how the work is messy, challenging, and rewarding. I don't know. I really resonated with that. I think we've all got the stories and the experiences of that process. And I want to move into talking about that, but let's just hang there a minute with data. You and I had a chance to chat and get to know each other a little bit last November in Chicago at the Partners in Community Forestry Conference. And I'm sure you'll agree, we saw a lot of maps. We saw a lot of data being presented. And I've always, back to 8th grade, you show me a graph on the screen and man, I'm just going to scratch my head. But you've mentioned it just now in terms of the importance of that mapping and data collection. And now I'm visualizing like not just Metro Chicago, but narrow focusing on the city of Chicago and neighborhoods like, well, I know you do a lot of work in Lawndale. Talk to our listeners about how that data collection with a neighborhood like Lawndale, North Lawndale, which I actually is pretty close to your home community of Oak Park, right? So right across Austin Avenue or something like that. But talk about how that data collection becomes so integral to working with the neighborhoods.
Absolutely. So to talk about our data, you have to first start with Lindsay Darling. I can't speak highly enough about our GIS guru and that she's continually helping source more and more information. And it's understandable. Tree data, science, technology, it's ever getting more sophisticated. It's an exciting time. But critically, again, thinking back to those two components of coalition and data, it's not just tree health data that we're focused on. We've also, from the beginning, been collecting socioeconomic data. So it's not just canopy coverage, it's air quality, it's urban heat island, it's temperature, it's other factors about that human component. So that guidance then helps us prioritize where we're working. So North Lawndale, we have been fortunate to work with many incredible, innovative, visionary leaders and organizations there. So many historic gardens, so much significance there. So a perfect example for us where we play second fiddle. We can bring some of this mapping information, but I will never know the community as well as these dedicated, wonderful community leaders. So for instance, we do have canopy summaries for every community in the 7-county region, including a unique urban heat island map. That often for me is a conversation starter. I can bring that map, I can send an email, and we can see where are the hot spots. And often it correlates to busier roads or industry. And that's a great conversation starter because I'm able to ask respectfully and learn, okay, where are trees needed most in this area? So North Lawn, great example of so much work already happening there, decades wide. And the nature of our work is that we might be able to focus on a particular planting site or community for a couple planting seasons or multiple years in the time frame of grants or funding sources. But I cannot be in North Lawndale day in, day out, 365 days out of the year. So critical to remember, we've got some resources, but is that useful to them? Making sure we're not part of a problem, but we are actively helping improve community health, improve that capacity. I think, too, it's exciting that there are some examples of cultural mapping. Chicago Park District has a wonderful resource. It's harder. There's going to be an anecdotal component. It's more messy to try and incorporate stories and perception and cultural heritage. But we have to make sure that doesn't get left behind with ever more sophisticated mapping and LiDAR imagery.
Do you find that when you're working with these community groups, that when you ask a question, like when you talk about heat island effect and, have you noticed anything in this community that has changed over time after we plant a tree or what have you? Do you see that organization with their antenna up and being more specific in their information collecting?
So I think I can take a step back on that one in that at times, understandably, trees and green infrastructure, we consider trees part of green infrastructure, that critical non-built environment aspect, just historically has not been prioritized. Many communities, unfortunately, don't have funding, don't even have a budget line for forestry. So it can sometimes be considered an afterthought. And I can understand that when you're dealing with poverty or you're dealing with significant human health issues. So I can see where sometimes we're considered more of a superficial aspect in community health. Make the case for it, how it's integral. But at the end of the day, I can see where planting 10 trees may not feel as impactful as ensuring job centers are up and running and ensuring we're hopefully eliminating a food desert because we're finally getting access to fresh food. Now, food forests, a really neat concept where you're planting at every layer of a forest, and that can be in an urban setting to grow food, is wonderful to help alleviate issues of not accessing fresh food. But the scale, sometimes it might be more of a garnish for a salad until you can really build up years worth of orchards or other access. So I think it's complex because we're part of the conversation, but we really need to work towards building those relationships and providing resources, but realizing maybe we're not going to be front and center for certain things. And I think what I really appreciate at the Arboretum, we talk a lot about tree time and that we're invested in the long term, that we know there's not a lot of short-term fixes. So sometimes even just being present as a participant first.
Oh, I like that.
Learning. And then maybe there's an opportunity to collaboratively pursue funding or to collaboratively help with community health.
Right. And does the Morton bring busloads of people from these communities to the Arboretum to actually immerse themselves in green and to actually maybe even feel the health benefits when they come to the Arboretum. Has that ever been done?
Yes, but I'd take another step back from that too.
Okay.
So the Arboretum has green space, but it's not necessarily better than or much more vibrant than Douglas Park.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So there's many green space options that don't require, a 30-mile drive out west. And we are aware of that. We appreciate that. But I think it's worked really well as a collaboration, give and take. So we might provide field trips for folks who've never been to the Arboretum. There is nothing like seeing an oak who has naturally been able to spread its branches far out, as opposed to a tree on an urban street. It's in maybe a 4-foot park row between a sidewalk and street. Vastly different habitats, different, space for roots and different stressors. I mean, trees deal with a lot of the same urban stressors we do. So there's no doubt that kind of that larger park setting is its own aspect of green space. But I think what's neat is that so much of our work is in communities. I might help co-lead a tree walk in North Lawndale, but I'm only providing one aspect because the boulevards are phenomenal. And that is a ready space. It's accessible. It's not fenced. You can walk right in. So I think that's important to note too. Inspiring people to value trees doesn't require going to the Arboretum, but it's realizing some folks are going to value trees economically, yes, in terms of the environment or in terms of human health. So finding how to connect with folks around trees, green spaces, wherever that may be, is key.
That's a good explanation.
There's a demographic there, Trinity. I'm thinking about people my age, retirees or whatever, that might be able to access the parks in leisure. But then there's that other demographic of the youth, tomorrow's urban foresters. And, sometimes I think that's a hard sell to get the kids engaged because, there's that screen and tech factor, and looking at a beautiful oak tree might not be as exciting or stimulate the central nervous system like staring down at your phone. That's a tough one, isn't it?
It's interesting. I think I really appreciate my sense of belonging now in these fields, urban community forestry. But it was a long, winding pathway, periods of dense fog, uncertainty, a lot of imposter syndrome, not seeing people who look like me, not the kind of representation you'd hope for in these fields. So now being here, I find it very rewarding to be able to, in turn, mentor. And I think we are able to hold a lot of field trips. Sometimes they're at the Arboretum, sometimes they're in community, connect with learning centers, not just schools, but libraries and community centers. And green job training is key. Trying to make sure we do a lot of tree plantings in schools, trying to make sure those students are getting exposure to what is an arborist, that this is a field that they might be interested in. And that's been really exciting. We're fortunate to have an excellent relationship with the Student Conservation Association, SCA. They're across the country doing wonderful job training, all kinds of work. Sometimes they might be more known for their work in even national parks, really phenomenal, but there are a lot of urban-focused crews as well. And we have a 6-month crew, especially starting in 2004 or 2003, and then continuing for the next few years. And this is great because we're able to have them housed out of the Arboretum. They're job shadowing. They too can walk down the hall and check out what's going on in the forest ecology lab, for instance. But they get that job training. So I think that has been so critical for our work. It can't just be focused on the here and now, but to your point, the next generation. Inspiring that next generation of tree stewards, growing people's affinity and stewardship of trees is critical. And hoping that they see more representation. I'm very fortunate, excited. We have a diverse crew. It's so important that those students, those volunteers are seeing that. But we need to do a better job of representation and providing more pathways, more kind of gateway areas for folks to get into these fields.
I think that when you were talking about your childhood and you get children when they're younger and you get them out in those green spaces, that's when you're really getting that sense of wonder and all of a sudden appears in their reading and what they're studying, how they approach different subjects, but also from an art standpoint, they might take up art because they want to draw trees, or they feel so inspired in a way that they hadn't before because they're being supported in what they're doing. And I think that that's really critical from an educational standpoint, but from a humanity standpoint. And it's interconnected to all of us. It's not just some of us, but it's all of us. And that's really where we need to be. And it takes little steps to get there, at least from my own observation. Sometimes the steps are really baby steps, but the baby steps get us there. So however way we need to do it, I think is critical.
Your alliances at this point, Trinity, I'm assuming you do have a handful of people that are your go-to tree ambassadors in that neighborhood, so that if you're going to pitch a specific idea or thought or activity, is there like a greening committee or alliance in that community?
There absolutely is. There's a greening committee, and then there are so many different types of community organizations. But I'd say it's a two-way street. My team might be bringing ideas to them. They're bringing ideas to us. But again, we're often following their lead because they know the community so well. We had a wonderful tour. They were so kind to give their time last November. And it was so many stops, just green spaces, doing innovating, sustainable, whether it was food production or it was just community programming. And many of these, you can just a few blocks away, there's something else that's happening that's forward-facing, solution-driven, and it's inspiring and humbling. And there's such a model to follow for so many reasons. But I don't think I can emphasize enough the collaborative nature of that and how wonderful it is to be able to continue to be inspired there, but to always be listening first, because they've got so much figured out that we're trying to emulate, that we're trying to respectfully understand and support as best we can.
Do you also bring other communities from other areas that you want to inspire to Lawndale and to meet their groups?
It depends. There's certainly a model, but I think respecting their time as well, taking the time to inspire others, it does, it takes time to lead tours. There's no doubt. So I think that there's a lot of cross-pollination, absolutely. But I also think, looking at Chicago, 50 wards, but more critically, 77 community areas. And that's,
77.
Yeah,
a lot.
77 distinct, culturally rich communities.
Yeah.
So each and every one, right? That's a lot of hearts and minds to connect with.
Yeah.
So we often kind of pace ourselves. We say Cook County alone is lifetimes of work. So it's investing in each of these communities as time allows. We're not in every single 77 community areas, but when we are fortunate to connect with someone in a new one or one we haven't spent as much time in, it's just an exciting time because it's a lot of information gathering. It's a lot of information exchange. Again, two-way street. I've got some info, they've got some. Can we work together? Maybe the timing's not right, and that's all right. But maybe further down the road, tree time, we can connect again. But we'll be here excited to work together.
And with your history background, I just want to ask, do you archive some of the information that you're gathering for your own diaries for the future?
History to me continues to be absolutely fascinating. I think for a while, it was kind of a disconnect. It was discouraging because I was especially interested in our people's relationship with the land, and just the nature of my coursework. It focused more on European settler, Western, which is just fraught, right? There's so much conflict with the land.
Sure.
So it was later on when I was able to learn more about traditional ecological knowledge and thought, this is it. This makes sense. Sustainability is ingrained. It's looking generations ahead. So that has really helped me in terms of thinking, what is our legacy? Are we helping, or are we still part of this kind of conflict-based problem?
Yeah.
So
sure.
I very much appreciate any context you can get, even for a school planting. What was on this land beforehand? What history are we dealing with? Could there be compacted soil? What heritage is there? That's so helpful. And so often, it might be anecdotal. There may not be plans from an old outbuilding that was demolished in the 80s, but a wonderful janitor might have that knowledge. So I think finding that context, there's always so much history, even in just a block wide area. We don't have the time to learn it all, but we're trying to respectfully get as much information as we can for a well-informed, future planning implementation.
Right.
Does CRTI get to help its constituents with growing food, trees, but also vegetables, vacant lot development for community gardens, or is that under the banner of another institution?
So we can participate to a point. I think if we come kind of from the upper canopy, mid canopy into the shrubby tree layer, so we can help with those layers. Food forests have really gained awareness, excitement, which is wonderful because we can contribute. And then what I like is a model where we're collaboratively pursuing funding, where permaculture, agriculture, urban growers can come from the ground up, ground cover, more traditional vegetables. We meet at orchards, lovely harmony there. And then we can even provide some larger trees, if you're thinking of persimmon, pawpaw, that do produce edible fruit that are going to be taller. So that's really exciting to be able to focus on that. That would be our main contribution to food in green spaces.
Is there any organization that maybe University of Illinois Extension or something like that that does help community members, though, put in the raised beds and bring in high quality topsoil for growing vegetables?
So there are a lot of organizations. I would say, though, again, just the plethora of ingenuity and innovation. I think Urban Growers Collective comes to mind, based out of the city, or Grow Greater Inglewood. There's so many place-based community organizations, and often they're multifaceted, right? It's not enough that they're just providing wonderful, delicious food. They're often providing job training, but they could also be focusing on education, programming, awareness. It's amazing what they're doing, what's in their wheelhouses. Often I would encourage anyone, please, search, find these rich volunteer opportunities, but also, for instance, farmers markets on weekends or certain times, and exactly where the food's coming from. You can talk to the growers, you can get involved volunteering. Everyone might not have the physical stamina to plant a tree. They might not have the space for it. No worries. Tree planting is one aspect of what we do. It gets a lot of attention, but sometimes advocating for trees could just be talking to your neighbor about benefits of trees. It could be volunteering on a tree board. It could be just investigating, does your community have a forestry budget line? Are there funds for the forestry? Is there a management plan? And CRTI can help with a lot of these resources. But I'd say I'd start with the communities you're interested in, because pretty much there's always vibrant, wonderful community organizations that have been doing this work for years. And absolutely, I'd shout out University of Illinois Extension, wonderful resources. Some other large green orgs like the Conservation Foundation, Nature Conservancy do have local connections, and you can utilize both.
When he's asking these questions about food, I think from my own experience at the university that usually food, when it starts with food in a community, you wind up with trees because they want a place to sit after they're working, or you see trees come along after because food is needed first, and then the trees come along. And that's how it happened here in Philadelphia. We had thousands of gardens, and then the tree program started. And that to me really tells that once you get people involved in gardening, they realize that trees go along with that too. It's part of the whole system rather than just part of the system. And whether it's a nut tree or an apple tree planted in a garden area, there's a shady area. And the next thing you know, well, maybe we could have something on our streets. And that's how it happens. But it's a process, and that process can take 20 years or it could take 5 years. And I think that having an institution like yours is actually helping to speed things up and helping to move, because there's so many more grants than we used to have years ago. I mean, we just didn't have them. And having this massive interconnectivity between one community and another really helps to make that green space more vibrant and more green, at least from my own observation and from what you're talking about. And I've been to Chicago and I've seen, and of course you've had Mayor Daley there who was really instrumental in greening the community and wanting things to happen, even environmentally and sustainably, when you had the sustainability center there, that energy center, which was so critical for getting people to do things from a right way, in other words. I just think it's very vibrant. in your area. It's very vibrant.
I had several robust conversations about green gentrification at the Partners Conference Trinity. And, there's some tension there. I think a lot of big cities deal with it when the greening initiatives become, again, robust. And Chicago has always struck me as a city, and I am comparing it to Philly. It flips a neighborhood a lot faster than Philadelphia does in terms of going from underserved black and brown to the new art gallery, the new restaurant, the new condominiums. Do you care to weigh in on this green gentrification question in terms of constraints and regulation? It's such a difficult quandary.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it up. It's something we talk about a lot. Where is our role in this? Trying to do everything we can to make sure we're not detrimental. I think for us, something that holds true is ensuring we are connected at the local level and we are able to follow, for instance, North Lawndale when they have their leadership, what they're determining is best for their community at the local level. I think it gets a little harder when there might be broader scope work where whether it's sudden funding or just an opportunity and things are moving so quickly that community engagement, community feedback is not incorporated from the beginning, that can be problematic. So for us, often we are working on smaller scale projects because we know that's sustainable. And we know that that is in line with what's best for this community and not necessarily what might profit or what might speak to larger goals that kind of leave people on their, even down to the block scale, leave it out of the equation. Yeah. So I can't necessarily speak to regulations or other aspects, but I know a community-centered approach, locally based, yes, we want to help enhance green spaces, but it's about that community capacity. So if that community capacity is growing, it's not just an aesthetic kind of superficial attachment, it's ingrained in what's best for that community, and that's what they're determining, and we're just following their lead. But it's a significant concern. And I think we've seen examples of very popular, well-received green improvements that didn't necessarily factor in the folks who live there. And I know community agreements can be critical aspects to help protect the people, the heritage. What is that kind of identity of that community, even despite larger scale green infrastructure, green development?
I think there are some communities here in Philadelphia that have actually put in an agreement that this is how it is. And I think you're right about that. It is really critical that there be some kind of close connectivity with the community, because that actually is what grounds that community into being there and not letting go of it, and really holding on to their values and not letting somebody come in and just do whatever they want. I think that that's really part of the critical piece that sometimes happens because people hear money and the next thing you know, people are scared off. They really are. And it's really sad when the whole community just crumbles to it.
Well, this would probably be a good time to take the conversation, scale it up a little bit to the positives. I'm remembering some fantastic images in your presentation last summer, and this had to do with, it was a commercial corridor. It seemed to be tied in with Chicago Transit Authority and stormwater management type gardens. There was some real innovation there with raised beds and trees and shrubs going into swales. Or am I remembering a different presentation altogether?
I have not been directly involved in planting in swales or stormwater management. It certainly relates.
Right.
But I'd say something that's similar would be vegetative buffer barrier project.
Thank you.
Really innovative with the EPA and recognizing learning centers, schools that are right next to very busy streets, highways, byways, and just that noise and air pollution, that is just nonstop. So often creating dense vegetation as a buffer, I think, is a really neat science-based solution. And then you're also able to share that information with the students. They are helping physically to plant this barrier, helping to physically improve the health of their community. I think that's a great model. What's even cooler is that it was in collaboration with the Arboretum education arm. So there's curriculum built out around it. So we have kind of curriculum guidance and support for how to grow these vegetative areas, how to talk about how to share it with students. So I think that's been a neat opportunity that we've been able to work on.
Sounds like something that's being done in Berkeley, California with Neelam Patel, with the children, where there's lots of asphalt and lots of echoing of sound and even small streets. And they're planting the Miyawaki or the tiny forests along these. And it doesn't have to be a really wide buffer. It just needs to be dense. And they are very successful with that. I don't know how many they planted, but there's a lot of them planted there. And they get the grants to plant them, and the kids absolutely love them. And they even name the trees and, talk to them and check on them, which is that sense of ownership too, which is really critical for community too. These are some things that we planted. This is something that we can be proud of, that type of response, which I think is really important for children.
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite stories from school planting was when a student ran up after. We always start with a demonstration planting, key steps for proper planting, investing in that time, loosening up the root ball, making sure it's the right height, the root flares exposed. That all pays dividends years in the future. And we have, rapt fourth graders doing such a good job listening, a little bit of fidgeting. And one student came up and sincerely asked, so green side up, right? When they were planting the tree. And it was just absolutely how sincere the students were, how dedicated. They just wanted to help with something, to have that responsibility. So I completely agree. But I also appreciate you bringing up asphalt, the preponderance of asphalt. And the built environment, we have not done ourselves favors with our car-based planning. And so many schools, there can be so little green space. So I think that is absolutely such a priority. You can have schools with little green space, and sometimes you have schools with vast campuses that are just grass. So there's so much opportunity for more complexity in the landscape. One tree every 20, 30 feet in more of an urban setting, maybe there are space limitations. But as much as possible, if we can build out groves, if we can build out more forest settings with shrubs, with groupings of trees, that is so much more organic and natural to our woodland heritage. But I think it's critical that yes, a lot of these school campuses could take hundreds of trees. It's just as critical to know what's the capacity to maintain them, especially in the summer for schools when teachers get a much needed break, students aren't there. So we've got to kind of temper our excitement with that tree time. Yes, we want to plant trees, but we have to sustainably maintain them. That's even more important in the long run.
I think you're right about that. And I was watching a class last night called Treeconomics. And it was comparing the U.S. with the U.K. And, how do you figure out how you're going to maintain all this infrastructure? Because it is infrastructure.
Right.
Using LiDAR and all kinds of photo GIS and all this so that they can actually see what the health of the trees are so that they can target those areas that need to be maintained. But it is critical. And that's why a lot of these schools I know in Philadelphia were concreted over, because nobody wanted to cut the grass and they didn't want to take care of plants. And that's how we wound up with massive concrete blocks around every elementary school, every middle school, because people didn't want to take care of those areas or even pay for those areas to be maintained. Yet they're the critical areas for inspiration.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there again, kind of our fraught history. And it may have been, there just wasn't the resources, the capacity to care for that green space was. How can we build funding and programming support so it can be that learning opportunity like you're talking about? There's so much potential, but there have to be resources for that infrastructure for sure.
I think of my elementary school back in Philadelphia where we lived. It was called Lawndale, and it was a Lawndale. That's why I have like this. This is close to my heart. And we had this massive concrete all around the school. And I want to tell you, I still have scars from when I was a kid falling there because there was no soft place to fall.
Right.
If you were playing. And that too is another thing to think about too, when you're thinking about children and playing and influencing and, making good citizens, you don't have green. It wasn't comfortable at growing up like that.
Well, and we know there's research that shows even patients recovering, if they're able to look out and see greenery of any type,
Yes.
that there's a faster recovery. Students too. I mean, it makes sense that if they're looking at, they're able to see greenery, that they do have, higher attention span, just a much more conducive, supportive learning environment.
Right.
But that's not the case for all students by any means.
That's right.
Sadly.
Yeah, we saw, again, referencing Partners Conference, but there was a presentation, a gentleman from California, very passionate, very objective and clear with every public school in the state of California needs to have significant green space. I remember he was a very good public speaker. His name doesn't come to mind, but such a sensible solution moving forward. But yeah, Trinity, you're right. Summer is so essential for teachers to get a break. And man, you hate to see those plantings go brown after 6-8 weeks of little or no water. The thrust of your presentation, again, in August was on contract growing and developing a relationship with regional nurseries throughout Illinois. Can you tell our listeners what contract growing is? Maybe they're hearing about it for the first time, and how CRTI is utilizing those trees.
So for us, contract growing involves putting out bids to request growers to agree to a certain time frame. It could be 5 years, could be 2 years, that they will grow certain types of species, certain quantities, certain containers. And then we know that we'll get those trees in the future. This has been vital for us because it helps mitigate risks for nurseries and growers, especially when we're asking for maybe harder to grow species. And this program helps support innovation where they can try different things, different procedures, mechanisms. But if something doesn't work out, there's room for substitutes. Because we know we don't want to just keep planting the same trees. As you may know, there's a prevalence of maples, for instance, in the public consciousness. And I understand it. Maples are lovely. And as of now, they're not dealing with too many significant pest disease issues. They're fast growing. They've got beautiful fall color. The reality is we have a lot of different native trees that also fit those criteria. So with contract growing, we're ensured high quality, diverse species in the future. For us, because we're planting with hands-on plantings, where we're coming out to plantings, we're connecting with communities, we've planned, co-led with the planting site, the landowner, always need that landowner approval, involvement, community engagements happening. That's a lot of volunteer planting. That's shovels. We're not really using heavy machinery. So for us, a more innovative method that's been developed is containers. So that could be a 15-gallon pot. It could be a grow bag. Grow bag's fascinating, semi-permeable barrier. So when the roots hit it, in theory, that air exposure, they're going to stop growing, but it allows for some airflow, water, and then you can peel them away. You can plant the tree, and the smaller containers, then you're planting the full root ball. So as you can imagine, even a couple fourth graders can be managing a 10-gallon, even a lighter 15-gallon containerized tree. Containerized trees are just one small component of the tree producing industry. Majority is still going to be balled and burlap, those big burlapped balls with the wire, with rope, and that's understandable. Often 2-inch caliper, kind of that caliper of the trunk, getting into the landscape, especially in more urbanized areas. So we're one component in containerized, but wonderful to see how we're seeing innovations, and contract growing is something that we will continue for the future because we need more diversity. We need that innovation in the field. And you said it right at the get-go, it's relationships, it's building partnerships. And we have a variety of incredible, wonderful nursery growers. We've got generations old nurseries, but we've also got newer, smaller scale urban and community growers. So really appreciate that spectrum. And we're trying to help build nursery infrastructure, touching on green jobs again, nursery industry, nursery career. I didn't get exposed to that until, well after grad school. So what if that could be the aha moment for a student if they're able to tour a nursery and they want to draw on permaculture, they want to draw on horticulture, but they want to grow trees. So I can't speak highly enough of contract growing and just how much our nursery partners have helped really lead the way and encourage us to innovate more. And we're excited. We actually just put out bid for a new contract growing program through Inflation Reduction Act funding through the Forest Service for 7 to 10 gallon. So we're excited. We've gotten feedback from community partners. The smaller sizes can be more accessible, more manageable for folks. We will still put out our 15 gallon. That's kind of our sweet spot. That works really well. But those are out. You can check out our website if you're interested in learning more. But very excited with the contract growing program.
Yeah, I think you mentioned in your presentation you want to grow trees so that, if I'm saying this tongue in cheek, if people are in a pinch, they can pick up their tree and take it home on the bus.
Right, absolutely. And I think that speaks to our kind of, you're getting into the 7, 10 gallon, almost more saplings. And we've handed out saplings outside credit unions, realizing everyone doesn't have the luxury of being able to come to a school tree planting in the middle of the week to pick up a tree. So ensuring that we're making these saplings more accessible is absolutely critical.
I love the fact that you're supporting the nurseries too, because we had that big conversation the other week when we were making our tree list for the region. And we talk about, how do we get the nurseries to grow what we want them to grow? And it's all about contract growing, because like you said, if there's something that doesn't work or if there's a crop failure, it's not just on the nursery. It's dispersed clear across the industry, and it's much easier to bear than if it's just one person bearing all that responsibility. And I think the other thing too, that here in the East is we do a lot of bare root. In fact, majority of our stuff is bare root for Philadelphia. And it's just, you pick it up and you take the tree home. It's in a plastic bag and it's got the hydrogel around the root system, and boom, somebody can take it, as you said, on the bus, on the train if they wanted to. And that's really how you get people to really love trees, because they can carry them with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also want to give a shout out, while we're on the topic, to Ringer, the Reforestation Nursery Genetic Resources Database. Forest Service nationwide. We're fortunate to be working on a project to help assess Ringer as is and how it can be more useful for urban and community growers. So within that, we're going to be helping to build out regional species lists. We're trying to figure out what are the gaps for folks to get involved in the nursery industry. Really robust survey, focus groups, workshops to figure out how is it working now? How can it be more useful? And just can't thank the Forest Service enough for the opportunity and the collaboration. Everyone's been so excited about this type of work, and that's really encouraging. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that, please reach out, and we'd love to collaborate. It is nationwide, so many experts, many resources are needed.
And full disclosure there, we just interviewed Jahan.
Oh, fantastic.
So
fantastic.
We have a Ringer interview. And I think that's, like you said, it is critical. And I'm glad that our interviews are falling into one another, because that way it'll all make sense to the listeners.
Right. You must have planned it. That's great.
I think it was by accident, really.
Well, it's what we always come back to. It's rhizomorphic networking.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The tendrils reached across the screen.
And now I know why Jahan's thing was canceled so many times, because it finally came up.
And Trinity's. We rescheduled her.
It was almost a year that we were trying to get her to come on.
No, wonderful resource. So glad to have.
That's really great. That's really great. Now, there's one last thing I want to ask you about seed. We're talking about a shortage of seed internationally. And the other week we interviewed Rebel Culture, and they're a new tissue culture place that is taking parts of plants and tissue culturing them because the seed there's not enough seed available, which we were excited to hear about. Do you have people using tissue culture for their tree starting?
So I do not know. We are fortunate to have a few nurseries in the region who do collect their own seed and then grow from seed. So that model is wonderful. But of course, not everyone can follow that model. But we are hoping to help build out infrastructure for that as well. It's encouraging that we get a lot of calls about, so I've removed my buckthorn and honeysuckle, some species that were not team players, taking over my yard. And there might be a wooded lot or a wooded vacant lot. And now they're getting volunteer oaks and hickories. And they're getting from the seed bank, the dormant seed bank, vibrant, wonderful wildflowers, spring ephemerals in the spring, these woodland wildflowers. And they're saying, please take these. So appreciate that, again, in our metropolis, there is so much potential for that, but organizing to actually collect the seed and then nurture it, that's a lot. But I appreciate that we know those spaces have been nurtured, at least locally. And I'm excited for the opportunity to explore that sustainably.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful.
You had mentioned the smaller urban nurseries. I've always had a soft spot for them. You meet the people that are doing it. They're so passionate. They're not making a lot of money. They're doing it for the love of trees and propagation. And I'm also thinking that, there's so much open, previously used brownfield space, particularly the southern regions of the metropolitan Chicago area. So it's kind of fun to envision urban nurseries. Like you say, they interface so well with that workforce development and green jobs. To be able to grow your urban tree, your urban native, right in the region that ultimately it's going to be planted in. Can you talk about one, maybe give an example of some of the smaller nurseries that you're able to work with?
So I would probably come back to Urban Growers Collective, but I think they're not just a nursery. I think another example of the multifaceted work they're doing, which is phenomenal, being able to visit and spend time at their South Farm down in the 10th Ward is just one example. And again, it's that public facing aspect where they do have a market, where they do have food available. And then they're doing such innovative work on different farms, different settings throughout Chicago. So I'd say that's one example to explore and learn from, to be inspired by, for sure. But I know there's a lot of growers that we're just not familiar with. So we're trying to build our network. And then I'm sure you've experienced this. If you're able to tour, just spend time with a grower, just all of the information they have, just this place-based, grueling hours spent learning the soil and learning plants. And it can be overwhelming. There's just so much knowledge there, and how they're able to build their own capacity, but how can we use that as a model? So I think staying local as much as possible, and yes, building up to some larger regional key points or regional
Hubs, maybe?
wisdom.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It really helps, but we come back again and again to local, to those 77 community areas. And that has really helped ground us.
That's fabulous.
Right before we came on to start speaking with you, Trinity, Jahan, who just guested recently, mentioned a nursery in central New York, Rare Earth Nurseries in Casanova in central New York. Never heard of them, looked them up, and they are innovating with Missouri gravel beds. And what I learned in the quick review of their website is they break it down about, balled and burlap, heavy, too deep in the burlap, ball, etc. Wire baskets are problematic. And then they talked about the limitations of bare root, that you got to plant them within 24, 48 hours. But then when they talked about Missouri gravel bed, I'm giving this little spiel here because our listeners may want to visit that website and also think about their own nursery development work. The people at Rare Earth are saying the beauty of Missouri gravel bed is that you can transplant it when it's in full leaf. And that was an interesting thing. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about horticulture, arboriculture, and growing trees is you're always learning new stuff. And they're saying, because 100% of that root system is intact when you extract it, you're going to be able to move that tree in a longer window. So, I just had to jump in there with an enthusiastic endorsement to Missouri gravel beds.
That's appreciated. And I think with whatever the production method, I think timing's key.
Yeah.
And if you have the opportunity to experiment with what works well with your soil and what local growers there are, that's wonderful. And just knowing the timing needed for moving from gravel bed versus a containerized versus a balled and burlap, like you say. But absolutely, there's so much to explore there. And then supporting local growers makes a really big difference.
Yeah.
I think that's very true. I mean, it's about local. It's about local. It keeps going back to local.
Definitely.
And if you can't get it locally, then you look regionally.
Right. You
go out from the center.
Exactly. Try to help support nursery industry, supporting growers. Absolutely.
Right. Well, we have to ask our favorite question, and that is, what is your favorite tree or group of trees?
So, in general, it would be a bur oak, Quercus macrocarpa, the gnarly nature, the lone or sparse bur oaks out on the prairie, I think calls to me. So I'd lean towards bur oak, but seasonally, I think it just depends. As long as there's diverse, healthy trees, that really makes me happy. So I'd probably say bur oak, but I do really also have an affinity for Carpinus caroliniana, American hornbeam, some of the kind of medium stature trees that don't get as much attention. Hackberry, for some reason, some folks,
Yes.
give it a hard time. Again, kind of a gnarly aspect to Celtis occidentalis. I love the idea of like the popcorn on the bark, but that persistent berry and the scruffy texture of the leaves, there's just so much character to it. And both of those trees can handle a lot. So I think that too, they're pretty tough.
Do you have a picture of a macrocarpa hanging on your wall from Ansel Adams by any chance?
I do not. I have way too many bur oak acorns and dried leaves between book pages, which what am I going to do with these? But I can't stop collecting them, right?
Oh my gosh.
For Thanksgiving once, I had like the dried leaves as the centerpiece. And so my family was like, oh, this is nice. Picking it up, like, oh, did you make this?
Yeah.
I just picked up a book last night and the leaf started crumbling from the page.
Yes. Like, oh, that's where I put this.
I think it was a Michael Durr book.
Oh, well, that's perfect.
Of course.
Right, I'll never stop, but I do sometimes wonder, maybe a collage of some kind.
Yeah. Oh, let's do it, Eva. What's your favorite tree?
Right now, it's my metasequoia sitting on top of my patio table in a pot. And I just love it just before it drops all of its branchlets. I love it.
Wow. Yes. So that will forever stay potted?
Until I get my permanent home.
Oh, all right.
It's a cutting from the original expedition to China.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's a grandchild from that expedition. That's pretty exciting. So I love it.
Excellent. What about you, Hal?
Well, I better say American Beach because there's one outside this third floor office window at my house. And I want it to hear me because I'm setting it up to start pollarding it later this winter. It got too big. It came up on its own. And I share a property line. Our house is a twin. So it's just the wrong tree, wrong location, so to speak.
That's tough.
But I'm going to sensitively start a pollard, and I want the tree to know that I love it, even though we're going to be fairly rigorous with it, with the pruning. Did you hear that, Phaedrus?
And my metasequoia is bonsai'd at like 8 feet.
Wow.
Yeah. We have some space constraints here in Philadelphia.
Oh my gosh, it was such a delight to have you on.
Well, thank you both very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we wish you the best, and we wish CRTI and the Morton Arboretum just great success for my beloved hometown, and I hope we cross paths sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Thank you both.
Yep, take care.
Take care, Trinity. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. The Plant a Trillion Trees podcast is edited by Andromedan Recordings in Hollywood, California.